Dragon Ball Z Infinite World is a title that to many is synonymous with frustration, challenge, and relentless difficulty. When I first picked up the game, I had no idea what I was walking into. But the moment the first match started, I was greeted with a harsh reality check, a brutal welcome from the game's AI.
I'll kill you!
This is where my goal comes in. I want to become good at a Dragon Ball Z game, but not just any Dragon Ball Z game, but what many consider to be the hardest Dragon Ball Z game of all time. But how exactly do I define being good? As in order to reach a goal, you kinda have to know what it is. So for this challenge, I'm defining being good as being able to beat the game on the hardest difficulty, that being the Z difficulty. The Z stands for Zoom. Your health is gone. You'd think, given this game's reputation, that I would want to head into the training mode to get some practice in. Well, that is what a smart person would do. But this is my playthrough, so naturally I drove headfirst into Dragon Mission, this game's story mode. When starting out, you'll be dropped onto the world map, taking control of a mini Goku. From here you're able to walk or run around to markers that represent opponents that you can fight. Well, for the most part, as this first fight isn't a fight at all, but one of the various mini-games featured in Dragon Mission. While I'm not as averse to these mini-games as some people are, I do think that having one right at the beginning was a bit of an odd choice. Ideally, you don't really want the player doing some side distraction before even getting a taste of the core gameplay. I'm going to be skipping over the minigames for the most part. While they do have different difficulties, I just want to focus on the combat segments, as they are the real meat and potatoes of this challenge. Like many Dragon Ball Z games before it and since, the first fight is against Goku's older brother Raditz, which shouldn't be too tough, right?
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
I have the difficulty set to normal, which is by no means the hardest difficulty, but if I were just to start out on the hardest difficulty, I would probably just spend hours trying to get past this fight. Unlike the Budokai games that came before it, Infinite World does not hold back when it comes to the AI. Even on easy and normal difficulties, they'll push on the offensive when they see an opening and also counter and guard when on the defensive. It makes the AI in the other Budokai games seem like the I stands for incompetence rather than intelligence. And as you can see at the end of the Raditz fight, I only barely won. The next few stages are actually mini-games, and I had honestly forgotten how many of them they make you play near the beginning. But you know how I said before that the first thing available at the start of the story mode was the mini-game? Well, that was a lie, as even though the game leads you into playing this mini-game first, there are tutorials that you can play before jumping into any fight. They really should have made these more obvious, as they are easily overlooked by first-time players. This isn't the only issue with these tutorials, as when you do end up playing them, you will realise that they really aren't very good at conveying exactly how to perform the controls they are trying to teach. For whatever reason, the devs thought it was a good idea to hide the instructions in this section here, that you must read before beginning the tutorial, because nowhere in the actual tutorial does it tell you what to do. This will be such an easy fix, with either having the instructions show up on the screen, or just have this text screen to be available from the pause menu. When you actually do figure out what the tutorial wants you to do, they are actually quite effective at helping you get the hang of the controls, and I made sure to do a couple of them before moving on to the next fight. The fight against Nappa is quite a leap in difficulty when compared to Raditz. He has more health and hits harder. Even though I had played some of the tutorials, I was still trying to get my head around the controls. This is most evident by my positioning and movement. I'm just not attacking at the right time, nor am I getting out of the way of oncoming attacks. On my third attempt, I got hit with Nappa's ultimate attack, Giant Storm. Some ultimates will have you play a little quick time event that you need to win in order to get the full effect of the attack or to defend against it. These are called ultimate struggles, and your goal is to have your bar filled more than your opponent's. Giant Storm is one of these attacks, and since I lost the struggle, it did full damage and also destroyed the stage. At this point, I was almost certain that I stood no chance in winning, but once the pressure of winning had left, I was able to relax and I started playing better. I was able to punish a few of Nappa's attacks, as well as getting in some decent damage of my own, and all of a sudden I was back in it. Unfortunately, I wasn't experienced enough to take advantage of a clear opening I was given right at the end, but this did boost my confidence. I quickly re-entered the fight and had another go. I didn't get hit with his ultimate this time around, but I came up just shy of beating him. And I thought to myself, if only I just had a bit more health to help me get over that final hurdle. Then I remembered, I had money. When you win a fight or successfully complete a minigame, you will be rewarded with zenny. The better you perform, the more zenny you will earn, and difficulty does affect the amount you get, with higher difficulties netting you quite a bit more. With this zenny, you can go to the warrior room and purchase capsules that will help give you an edge in battle. Since I was just starting out, there isn't much to purchase, but there is the capsule Fighter's Body. This will increase Goku's health by 500 points. Now I have the same amount of health as the AI. It is more of a fair fight, and I don't know if it was the safety net of the extra health or just taking the short break to get the capsule, but I was able to defeat Nappa with a lot of health remaining, way more than the extra that the capsule gave me. Vegeta was my next opponent, and is kind of the final boss of the Saiyan saga. Infinite World's fighting system is a culmination of all the Budokai games that came before it, and I'm not just talking about the trilogy on the PS2, but also the PSP titles and even some influence from Burst Limit, as its development did coincide with that title. It was even confirmed by the creators that Infinite World was made for those who did not have access to the 7th gen consoles. As far as the Budokai series goes, Infinite World is definitely the most refined in terms of gameplay, and in my opinion is the strongest out of all of the games. On the surface, the gameplay is very reminiscent of Budokai 3, but the small tweaks to the system are enough to make the combat feel very different. It is a lot faster paced, and there is more of an emphasis on managing not only your health and ki, but also your fatigue. The fatigue meter is one of the more punishing mechanics that Infinite World uses. It's a little orange meter of stress and anxiety. Pretty much any action will have the meter fill, and there isn't really much you can do to stop it. When the meter fills, your character will become fatigued, and they will stop in their tracks and have to rest. This is the most vulnerable position that you can be in, and the fatigue system is a real hurdle to work around, and it is due to fatigue that almost had me lose this fight. With one last Kamehameha, I was able to defeat Vegeta on my first attempt. I have only beaten 3 opponents so far and can already see a huge improvement, but these are what you would consider newbie games. As I am getting better, the game is going to be getting harder as I progress through the story. With Vegeta down, it is time to head off to Namek. Namek started off really bad, as Recoome kicked my ass. So I went into the training mode to get some practice in, and this is where I want to go over cancels, which I don't think is an intended mechanic, but they were in the other titles, so maybe the devs did know about them and just left them in. Anyway, any combo that has a charge move in it can be cancelled, meaning that you can end the animation early and continue with a string of attacks. Performing cancels can be really finicky, especially when just starting out. I watched a few tutorials on how to do them, but I didn't have that much luck. Goku is supposedly the easiest character to perform cancels, and they are performed by pressing the guard button when the charge attack is being charged. With a bit of practice, I was able to do it, but not that consistently. Thanks to that little practice session, I was able to defeat Recoome. I continued on to the next stage, which was a fight against Captain Ginyu. Before entering the fight, I made sure to equip Goku with some ramen noodles. You're able to hold one item per character, and these items can be used during a fight. The first time you go to taunt, it will activate your item. There are various effects these items can grant, like temporary stat buffs or restore health and ki. Ramen noodles restore a pretty decent amount of health, and I was able to use it during this fight. And this is probably the reason I was able to win on my first attempt. I even got a really good score because the game thought I didn't take much damage. I feel like a fraud. The next fight, I was already facing Frieza in his final form. I always forget how little interaction Goku has with Frieza when compared with everyone else. Movement in this game can be a bit to get used to, especially if you haven't played any of the Shin Budokai games. The Aura Dash mechanic was added in the Shin Budokai games, and they have been carried over into Infinite World. It's a super quick form of movement that allows you to easily maneuver around the arena. It is both great in offensive and defensive scenarios. You can use it to quickly approach your opponent and even get behind them. It also works well as a way to evade attacks and give yourself some breathing room. It doesn't cost anything to use aside from increasing your character's fatigue. Aura Dash is really useful if you remember to use it. I really did underuse this mechanic as I was too focused on trying to teleport counter opponents and wasting precious ki when I really should have just been using Aura Dash. Defeating Frieza once isn't enough as there is one more fight in the saga. I really do like this little detail of the overworld map changing. At the start of this battle, Goku is already a Super Saiyan. Usually you do have to transform during a fight, but sometimes in the story mode, the game will force you into a certain form with a certain capsule on your character. Transformations are very powerful in this game, as they raise the character's baseline ki, and having a lot of ki is very advantageous. Transformations can also be used defensively, as when transforming you're able to break your opponent's guard. When done with the correct timing, you can even use it to extend a combo. I can't do it though. Once again, I was able to defeat Frieza on my first attempt, thanks to ramen noodles. Not sponsored. Some may think that using healing items is a cheap way to win, but it is one of the mechanics that the game gives you in order to help you overcome the challenge. In fact, Infinite World is far more fair in its difficulty than it first seems. Aside from some training and minigames, there is only one stage in the Cell Saga available to fight in. This is due to one of the ways that Infinite World helps aid the player that doesn't really become obvious until after you get past the Cell Saga in the story mode, and that is the fact that you can only play as Goku in the first half. Now this may only seem this way because Goku is the main character of the series, but it also has the secondary effect of making the first half of the game a bit more forgiving than it otherwise could be. Goku is one of the strongest characters in the game, and is also one of the easiest to get a handle on the controls. His base attack is quite high, and has access to many transformations that only make him more lethal. His combos flow nicely together, and even I was able to air juggle opponents a couple of times. Plus, since you're playing as Goku consecutively, you aren't constantly switching between characters and having to learn different movesets on the fly. However, once the Buu Saga begins, the game does make you fight as adult Gohan a few times. It then does something very cruel, and that is the Goku vs Majin Vegeta fight. Whenever I start practicing at something, I always hit a plateau, where I just feel like I'm making absolutely no progress for what feels like forever. This fight is when that plateau effect felt its strongest. Attempting this fight over and over and over again, and just getting nowhere with it. Majin Vegeta has the same amount of health as Goku, but he does have a higher base ki, which means his ultimate is easier to get off, and he did manage to hit me with it a few times. His ultimate is the final explosion, and yet he doesn't lose any health by using it. That's not very canon. His ultimate is another one that makes you play the struggle minigame. The speed of the bars depends on your fatigue level. With maximum fatigue, the ultimate gauge moves very fast. I'm not sure how the devs decided which ultimates require the struggle event or not, as some of the most powerful characters just get to have their full power ultimates no matter what, but then weaker characters don't, making them even weaker in comparison. You'd think there'd be more of a balance, but they just come across as arbitrary. There are also real-time ultimates that play out just like super moves, but are far more powerful. At first they come across as overpowered if you don't know if a character has one, but once you know, they are quite easy to avoid and they are all blockable. The only one that gave me real problems was Piccolo's Special Beam Cannon, since it is by far the fastest real-time ultimate attack. After beating my head against the wall for a while, I decided to take a break from the Vegeta fight and go fight Fat Buu with Gohan. This fight is actually a survival fight, and unlike in normal fights, you don't have to beat your opponent. You just have to stay alive. Basically, you don't have to win, you just aren't allowed to lose. And it turns out that that break was exactly what I needed. It seems I was able to break through that plateau thanks to a bit of rest. The next fight, I got my first go at controlling Super Saiyan 3. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hold on to the form for the entire fight. If you're knocked down while fatigued, you'll be reverted back to a character's base form. This can be quite devastating when it happens, but thankfully Fat Buu was already really low on health, so I was still able to defeat him. The next fight is quite the marathon. It is Ultimate Gohan vs Super Buu, and he is not afraid to drag out the fight by going through multiple absorptions. PPPPE. is one of the first combos that a player learns when picking up the Budokai games, and was the only combo I used when playing as a little kid. It is one of the easiest way to get off a super attack, and in Budokai 1, you had to perform some sort of combo before you could even use a super attack. Yeah, remember that? Those were dark times. Anyway, this simple combo on the lower difficulties was more likely than not going to hit. But not in this game. Relying on this combo will almost always get you punished. The AI will usually just dodge to the side or teleport behind, and if we start playing the game of who can teleport the most, they will most likely win, as you just used a bunch of your ki to fire off your super attack. The safest way I found to get a guaranteed super attack was very simple. Whenever my opponent became fatigued, I hit them with a powerful super attack, or even better yet, an ultimate attack.
Oh, what's wrong, little boy? Do you need an adult?
No. I am an adult.
Facing Super Buu again, the fight begins with Goku and Vegeta already fused into Vegito. Usually fusions come in the form of a character's ultimate, but the story mode will sometimes just let you start as a fusion character. Fusion dance characters will have a time limit until the fusion runs out, but Potara fusions like Vegito just work like standard characters. Kid Buu is up next, and as usual, he is brutal. After multiple attempts but having no luck with defeating the Pink Menace, I went over to the warrior room to see if there were any new capsules that might make the fight a little bit easier. Before, I briefly went over how you can equip capsules to a character to upgrade them. This capsule system was featured in the first 3 Budokai games, but this iteration works a bit differently. There are 8 slots that you can equip to a character, but instead of them being freeform, they are assigned slots for certain types of capsules. There is 1 slot for a character's ultimate, 2 for supers, 1 slot is for an item, and 4 slots for abilities. On the surface, this may seem more restrictive than the other versions of the system, but this isn't necessarily true, thanks to the changes that the game made to the capsules themselves. Instead of having to stack transformation capsules to be able to transform into a Super Saiyan 1, 2, 3, etc., you just have to equip a higher level version of the transformation capsule, leaving you more room for other abilities. And this level mechanic isn't just exclusive to transformations. There are higher level super attacks, ultimates, better items, and abilities. For example, here I brought a higher level version of Fighter's Body, which gives Goku more health even though it still only takes up 1 slot. When starting out, a character will not have all of their ability slots unlocked. To unlock them, all you have to do is purchase them. They are quite expensive, which is even more of a motivation to get good at the game, since the higher the difficulty, the more zenny you'll earn for each fight. The capsule system is fantastic and is a great way to tailor the game's difficulty more to your liking. If you want the game to be extremely challenging, then you can opt out of using capsules, but if you need some extra help, then you can use them. Even though Infinite World is way harder than any other Budokai game, it actually gives players a lot of help in rising to the challenge, as well as giving quite a bit of freedom as to how hard you really want the game to be. And thanks to taking advantage of this extra help, I was able to defeat Kid Buu, and I was starting to feel really good about this challenge. Infinite World actually has a saga dedicated to Dragon Ball GT, though it isn't very long. However, the small amount of fights within it are quite difficult. If you have ever played Budokai 3, you may have noticed that Dragon Rush along with the Hyper mode has been removed, and thank God for that, as Dragon Rush was so annoying. These mechanics have been replaced with something called Ki Burn. Ki Burn is a mechanic that drains all of your ki at a steady rate, but grants you hyper armor and temporarily suspends all ki costs. Hyper armor is a state in which a character can withstand attacks without flinching or being interrupted. This means that while Ki Burn is active, you can take hits without being knocked back or having your action stopped. The temporary suspension of ki costs means that even if you activate Ki Burn with only 2 ki bars, you can perform as many teleports or whatever you want, regardless of remaining ki. While in Ki Burn, you are free to attack without fear of being counter-attacked because of the hyper armor, which sounds really overpowered, but is really easy to counter by simply running away from a character using it. When in the Ki Burn state, a character will change to a bluish colour, making it really obvious when they are in that state. The ki gauge also changes to a glowy fiery texture, which will indicate when the key burn will end. Once key burn ends, you or the opponent will be left with no key, making it a very vulnerable position. At this point, you can rush in and attack, knowing that they have no key left to defend themselves. This is why I think it is better as an answer to your opponent's own use of the technique, rather than a reliable offensive approach, which admittedly took me a while to realise, as the lure of not being able to be flinched is a strong one. I managed to make it to the end of the GT saga, getting ready to face off the opponent that I had been dreading, the Shadow Dragon Shin Shenron. As you can see, Shenron has a really high baseline key, as in pretty much max. This makes him a lot harder to punish with teleport counters. Even when starting as Super Saiyan 4, this fight is really hard. To put it simply, it is my nightmare. This fight felt like a nightmare. I have a lot of hidden self-hatred that often resurfaces when I get frustrated in my inability to do something. I'm not really sure where it originates from, but it is probably just a build-up of a lot of little things that have happened throughout my life. Sometimes I shy away from difficult things because when I face failure, it makes the voice in the back of my mind that tells me I'm a worthless piece of shit louder. It's hard to ignore it, and it makes me do worse because I feel worse and the cycle continues. It may seem like a stupid thing to get so upset about, but it is more about everything surrounding it. I felt furious that I couldn't actually accomplish what I set out to do. I really did want to get good. But what I didn't realize at the time, when this was all going through my mind, is that I was right at the peak of the difficulty curve, and all it would take is one last push. I gave up. But only on the fight, not on the challenge. Admittedly, I was at a bit of a loss as to what to do next. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the beginning. If I could defeat the early fights on the hard difficulty, then surely I should be able to defeat GT's most powerful villain on normal. So that is what I did. I fought my way back through the Saiyan saga, and it really helped me to change my perspective on just how far I had come. It is so easy to look down on yourself when it feels like you're always failing, like you hadn't improved at all despite all of the effort you put in. But when I went back and refought the fights I struggled with at the beginning of the challenge and found them to be fairly easy, this allowed me to better gauge just how much better I had actually gotten. It helped me to get my confidence back and quieted that annoying voice in my head. After a few fights, I went back. I went back to face Shin Shenron, but this time I was going to face him on hard. This may seem like a dumb idea, but remember that difficulty curve that I had been right at the peak of? Well, I had gotten that one last push I had needed. I had finally done it. I had defeated Shin Shenron, but that still leaves Omega Shenron. However, since I get to start the match as Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, and the time limit that you usually have is bypassed, this fight is more of a victory lap rather than a real challenge. After completing the GT saga, you are able to go back through the story mode and take on some new fights and mini games that have opened up. But these fights will now require me to take control of other characters besides Goku, which depending on the characters can make the fights quite a bit more challenging. But I kind of really like how they paced out the story mode, and it's one of those ways that the game is helping you succeed without you really noticing. Since I've had a bit of practice just making it this far, I am pretty proficient with all the basic controls and some of the more advanced mechanics. So when applying these skills to other characters, it doesn't feel overwhelming at all. Some characters I did gel with more than others, but none felt bad enough that I felt like I didn't stand a chance at winning. One of the characters that I had the most trouble with was Piccolo. I don't know exactly why. He has good reach, but his attack timing and animations are quite a bit different from other characters. It didn't help that I also had really bad luck while playing as him too. Partway through a fight, my controller died, and with no way to pause the game, I quickly ran to find a charging cable. All the while the AI was free to do as it pleased with Piccolo. When I returned, I was surprised that I hadn't lost yet, and something even more surprising, I was still able to win. This got me thinking that maybe I needed to up the difficulty again. But before I do that, I need to make a change that will greatly impact the outcome of this challenge, and one that I wish I had done a lot sooner. The default controller layout for Infinite World is pretty intuitive and is very similar to other Budokai games, so I never thought to change it. But as I have been playing the game more and more, I keep getting this thought in my mind, which was, I wish the guard button was on one of the triggers. Now in my low IQ brain, this wish never converted into the action of going into the controller options and actually changing it. One of the great things about the games in this series is they do allow you to have a completely custom layout. So after hours of play and crawling my way through the story mode, I finally went into the options and changed the guard button to R1. And what a difference this made. Guarding, dodging, teleporting, charging, just so many actions became so much easier to execute. It's like a new level of play had been opened up to me. After a few fights with my new control scheme, I decided that it was time to up the difficulty to very hard. To be honest, the difference between the hard and very hard difficulty doesn't feel that big. I mean, very hard is definitely harder, but not by much. Infinite World's difficulty curve reminds me a lot of playing a Dark Souls game for the first time. The beginning hours of the game are really rough. Getting your head around the controls and try not to get too frustrated with losing all the time. But then you get to the point you kind of just accept that you're probably going to lose a lot, and it just becomes part of the process rather than something to be feared. I think this is why I decided to switch from very hard to the Z difficulty way quicker than with the other difficulties, because I was starting to chase the challenge rather than shying away from it. And there is also a mechanic that is sort of the key to getting good at this game. And once you understand how it works, Infinite World gets so much easier. I've been alluding to this mechanic quite a bit throughout this challenge, and that is teleport counters. Teleportation plays a far more prominent role in fights, especially when playing on higher difficulties. If you time your guard and hold the back direction at the correct time, you're able to counter by teleporting behind your opponent. Unlike in Budokai 3, you will not automatically hit them. Instead, you remain in full control and just be placed at your opponent's back. This is a teleport counter, and they are extremely useful. But you still have to watch out, as your opponent can even teleport behind you from this position. So sometimes you'll just have this back and forth of both of you just teleporting behind each other until one of you messes up the timing or run out of ki. When first starting out, getting the hang of teleporting can be one of the biggest hurdles to overcome, as the timing is quite strict, but the slightly older controls make teleporting much more reliable than in Budokai 3. I know I keep comparing this game to Budokai 3, but there is a good reason for this. More people have played Budokai 3, and the controls are very similar. So even though Shin Budokai 2 is arguably a more comparable game, I'm using Budokai 3. Anyway, in Infinite World, instead of having to double tap and holding back on the directional button to charge ki, there's a dedicated button for it now. This not only makes charging less finicky, but it frees up the directional buttons for teleporting, making it more intuitive and reliable. Because teleporting uses up ki, it is very important to keep an eye on your ki. In fact, all of the best moves in the game cost ki. Managing it effectively can make or break a fight. Most characters start with 3 ki bars, but there are others that start with way more, which can make a fight way easier if you're controlling them, or way harder if you're fighting against them. Having more ki bars than your opponent gives you a significant advantage, allowing you to teleport counter one more time than they can. A capsule that is definitely worth investing in is Essentials to Evasion. At first I read the description of it and was like, nah, I don't think I'll use that. Well, I was wrong, and I ended up equipping pretty much every character with it. Once I finished playing through the GT saga from the other characters' perspectives, a whole new saga unlocks, called Another Story. This part of the game is based off various Dragon Ball Z films. There are a lot of fights against Broly. I mean, I know Broly has 3 films, but this is a bit much. Infinite World has a great representation of the series as a whole. There is a lot of variety of who you get to fight with and fight against. In the early 2000s, the Budokai series was the go-to for Dragon Ball Z fans. Coming out a few years before the Tenkaichi series, it was the closest players could get to experiencing the spectacle of the franchise on home consoles at the time. Many believe, and this included me at some point, that the series concluded with Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 in 2004. But this isn't actually the case, as the third installment was followed up by Shin Budokai 1 and 2, or Another Road as it was known in some regions. They were released on the PSP in 2006 and 2007, Since they were not released on home consoles, they didn't get as much attention, and some consider them to be mere spin-offs rather than fully fledged Budokai games, which I don't really agree with, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Finally, in 2008, 4 years after the release of Budokai 3, the PS2 would receive Dragon Ball Z Infinite World, who many consider to be the true sequel to Budokai 3, essentially making Infinite World the Budokai 4 we thought we never got, but actually did. Upon Infinite World's release, it did not go over well with critics. Many cite it to be iterative of the series, with erratic gameplay and obscenely challenging AI. Now, having played through Infinite World a few times, I pretty much disagree with most of the critics' points. Infinite World is supposed to be a celebration of the Budokai games, showing off the best the series has to offer, and that is exactly what the game does. The final fight in the story mode is not against the villain, but is actually against Pikkon, and he is a tough opponent. I managed to reach Super Saiyan 4 pretty early, however I got hit with his ultimate attack and lost a lot of health. Thankfully I still hadn't used my item, though I had built up a lot of fatigue and he was able to knock me back to base form, and I thought it was over for me. But somehow, I was able to bring it back. With the story mode completed, that must mean I have completed the challenge. Well, originally this was where I was going to stop. I had struggled my way through a lot of battles and am finally able to play on the Z difficulty, which is a huge feat considering where I started. However, there is still a much bigger challenge that the game offers. Once I had completed my first playthrough of the story mode, I was able to purchase the Fighter's Road capsule from the Warrior Room. Upon purchasing this particular capsule, a new mode will be added to the main menu called Fighter's Road. When starting up this mode, you'll be taken to a character select screen where you are able to pick from any of the characters you have unlocked. Unlike in the story mode, Fighter's Road allows you to fight as any character you want. Fighter's Road has a very similar structure as the main story, as it will bring you to the world map where you will move around as a mini Goku and select fights, even when not playing as Goku. Fights are all that is to be found on Fighter's Road. There are no minigames, tutorials or cutscenes, just pure combat. But what makes this mode more challenging than the story mode? Well, it's pretty simple. Most of these fights are more difficult than anything found in the main story, even when facing off against characters that you have faced before. The AI possesses more health, along with being equipped with high level capsules and support items. These factors make the fights much longer, and you must remain focused and have consistent play for a longer period of time. This may not seem like that big of a deal, but if you slip up at any point during a fight, the AI will not hesitate to punish you and could cost you the entire fight. And if this happens near the end of a long battle, this can be devastating, not to mention frustrating. Since I knew these fights were going to be a lot harder, I decided to stick with playing as Goku, as I had become so familiar with his moveset. It also helps that I had already purchased a lot of his capsules already. This is one of the annoying things about the capsule system, is it does kneecap you a bit when switching characters, at least if you are poor. I feel like this can also contribute to people thinking this game is a lot harder than it really is, as if you are playing on the easier difficulties, you won't be earning that much zenny, which means you can't afford the better capsules, and without the better capsules, the game is a lot harder. It's like a vicious cycle. Though it makes sense to reward players winning on the harder difficulties. In a way, the easier difficulties actually make the game harder, just not in the way that you would initially pick up on. With the amount of zenny earned from playing on Z difficulty, I could pretty much buy whatever I wanted. One of these things was a Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta Fusion capsule. Like I mentioned before, fusions take up the ultimate slot, but once fused, the fusion character does still have their own ultimate attack. Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta has the requirement of Goku being in his Super Saiyan 4 form before the fusion can take place. With such aggressive AI and the need to utilize the teleportation mechanic quite a bit, this is a pretty high requirement. A lot of the attacks and abilities have requirements before they can be used. Ideally these should fit into your playstyle, but some are worth going out of your way to activate. And I wanted to see if this is the case for Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. Plus he is just one of my favourite characters. Depending on how a fight goes, dance fusions can occur multiple times during a single fight. This is because they have a very limited amount of time that they can remain on the battlefield before they will revert back. To help balance this type of fusion with the permanent Potara fusion, their key gauge is replaced with a timer and they have unlimited ki. It's very similar to the keyboard mechanic, and like the keyboard mechanic, it can be easily countered by just running away. Even if you have unlimited super and ultimate attacks, it doesn't really matter if you can't hit anyone with them. Luckily, the AI isn't quite smart enough to play keep away for that long, but I can imagine if I were playing against a human player, using fusions would be a waste of time. As you can imagine, Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta does a shit ton of damage, and once achieving this form, the match is pretty much over, which was so much fun. For a bit. Like activating God mode in a video game, the initial power trip gets boring fairly quickly. At this point, I'd been playing as Goku for a while and was able to build up a fair amount of Zenny. So I decided to venture out of my comfort zone once again and play as some different characters. Fighters Road character select has a random option, and that is what I kept doing. Fights on Fighters Road do not unlock in a linear order, as you do have some choice as to what fights you would like to tackle. You will eventually have to fight everyone if you want to unlock everything in the game, as certain capsules are locked behind certain fights. As to be expected, as I progressed, the opponents got tougher and tougher, with some characters acting as sort of bosses. The game will highlight these fights with a little dialogue exchange, as well as Commander Red pointing out that the opponent will be particularly tough. Sometimes these fights will take place on the World Tournament stage. This does make the fights a little bit easier, as you can win by knocking the opponent out of the ring for an instant win. But then there is the chance of you getting knocked out, which I always found to be 10 times more stressful. I don't know what it is about the ring out mechanics that gets to my brain so much. Anyway, not all of these boss fights will be on the World Tournament stage, and I will have to win the old-fashioned way. The most challenging fights in the entire game, in my opinion, are those against characters like Frieza and Cooler, who have capsules that have a resurrection effect. For example, after depleting Frieza's health to 0, he will come back as Mecha Frieza, with a completely replenished health pool, and there is absolutely no way to avoid this from happening. So essentially you have to win 2 fights to pass the stage, and this is where the support items become extremely useful. I noticed as I progressed through the game, my item usage became a lot more important to my strategy. At the beginning, using healing items was mostly a way to negate some bad plays, but as the opponents get stronger and the fights get longer, it becomes crucial to time item usage correctly. You don't want to use them too early in the fight, as you won't always get the full effect of them, but if you wait too long, you run the risk of not getting to use them at all. Since you are completely vulnerable when activating an item, it leaves an opening for your opponent, and if you are interrupted during any point of using an item, it not only means you take damage, but it also negates the item, and you only get one shot at using it. So you have to be very careful when going to use them. The AI also begins using items as well, and reading the animation of when they're about to use it and interrupting it is a massive advantage. There are even some opponents whose item just cancels you being able to use yours. I freaking hate that. There are just so many little mechanics that this game has that seem simple on the surface, but add up to a quite nuanced gameplay loop. And Fighters Road will throw a lot of challenging fights at you, to make sure that you make use of them all. Some of these fights can be really hard, but it is really satisfying when you manage to overcome them. And the game will reward you handsomely for your accomplishments, with you getting access to some of the best capsules in the game, as well as a huge payout. When I played Infinite World for the first time a few years back, I didn't think much of Dragon Road. I thought it was a bit tacked on and was just there to pad out the game. However, after getting better at the game and having a better grasp on Infinite World's various systems, it is my second favourite game mode featured in the Budokai series. Of course, second only to Dragon Universe and Budokai 3. The freedom of being able to play as any character made the experience a lot more enjoyable, and also a lot more challenging depending on the characters. I made sure to fight with each character at least once, and without a doubt there are characters that are definitely better than others. Even with that said, Infinite World's excellent gameplay still shines through, and with enough practice and patience, you are able to overcome the game's challenge with any character. It has become a bit of a cliche to state that a game is the Dark Souls of a certain series, but Infinite World really is the Dark Souls of Dragon Ball Z games. Like Dark Souls, Infinite World is not very new player friendly, at least on the surface. It shares a very similar difficulty curve when picking it up for the first time. It also shares a similar reputation among the wider community of being really hard. The biggest barrier to Infinite World is information. Having knowledge that this game is supposedly extremely hard can sometimes give the misconception that it is hard for the sake of being hard, or even being unfair. But this could not be further from the truth. Infinite World respects its players. There is a point that you hit while playing Infinite World where you just get it. All of the mechanics that you've learned just come together in a way that doesn't make the game easy per se, but makes it not stressful. At the beginning of this journey, I would start a fight nervously, with sweaty hands and twitchy fingers, but now I just enter a sort of zen mode, allowing me to read the AI's actions better and execute my own better. If getting good at Infinite World has taught me anything, it's not to stress out too much about losing. Sometimes before you win, you have to learn how to lose. If you are still improving, then a loss isn't really a loss. By no means have I conquered Infinite World's gameplay. I can't really juggle opponents in the air or do those crazy infinite combos that I've seen other players do. But at the very least, I can say I got good at the hardest Dragon Ball Z game. Okay, bye.